Great to have you here, guys. So I'll walk through this. It shouldn't take the full 40 minutes, so at the end we can have a Q&A session too if you guys have any questions. But decentralized data markets for training AI models, I'll break down what that means. There's a few buzzwords in there, but hopefully I'll make it a little more realistic for you guys by the end of this session. I think the first thing is, and I think this is something where I'm preaching to the choir here, but AI has made the world more computable. And by that, what I mean is we're used to rules-based computing. And it works great. In fact, for most things, it's the right way to go. If this, then that. But I think in recent years, what's really impressed me, and I'm sure a lot of you guys here too, is just the rise of inference-based computing. And the reason why that's fascinating is because now you can do some pretty complex things that are hard to encode in just rules. So for example, taking this microslide image and being able to distinguish between what you think indicates a tumor and what you think indicates just macrophage, which is pretty innocuous to the human body, right? And it's kind of funny. I put in this quotation, because I think it says something. Right? It's like, hey, I've seen this before. That's one thing, right? That's cancer. I'm 92% sure. I've seen this before because that's how these systems work after seeing lots of training data, after learning how to kind of view these things. And the 92% sure thing is also important because really what we're doing here with inference-based computing is you're trading off certainty for task complexity, right? Because now you can do these complex things, but you're actually not, there are error bars within which you know your result and output to be true or not, right? And the thing about this is so there's that natural trade-off, but how do we at least dial up certainty, even as we do more complicated inference-based kind of tasks? And one of the natural solutions is more data does help up to a certain point, right? But more data does help add certainty. So what have been the unlocking events for inference? There have been a few. One is just the most obvious research breakthroughs in AI. And I would say this kind of goes back over decades, right? We think about the last few years, but some of the breakthroughs in the last few years were actually applications of ideas from decades past, but certainly research breakthroughs is one of them. But what was really different too was just how computing power and GPUs have made these ideas experimental, right? You can actually test them. And the last bit is the wealth of data, which of course the internet contributed greatly to. Except I like to put an asterisk on that last one and say sort of, kind of. And the reason why is because in reality, AI has made the world more computable, but data often isn't computable enough. What I mean by that is data can be very ugly, data can be very messy, data is taken out of context, maybe it doesn't have the right labels, right, for example. And data is also often locked away in silos, and this is becoming more and more of an issue. The first two, these are challenges with quality control and standards. And this last point, well, quite frankly, having data silos, using that as your competitive advantage, it just makes good business sense. So it's not a knock on that strategy, that model. I think that's perfectly fine and reasonable for a lot of applications. But I guess what I'm here to talk about today is I think there are also lots of applications where data sharing can create a lot of non-zero-sum value, and it can also be profitable. I think you can actually align free market capitalist incentives with that notion. So basically, what if it also made business sense to share data, right? So you're a data supplier, you make money. You're a data buyer, you have queries you want to run, but you don't have the data. You pay money, but you get data, right? And this isn't necessarily new, and it's also not this simple, right? I think if you look at what it means, well, for data to be really high quality stuff that you're willing to pay to get access to, there's a number of steps you have to go through, right? There's an entire supply chain of data, essentially. There's sourcing it, structuring it, validating it, and then the selling process. But I guess what I'm here to talk about today is, what if we made each one of those steps paid and financially attractive for people to do in a crowdsourced manner, right? And then on the buyer side, you're able to get access now to relevant, clean, and valuable data. And that's something that's the inspiration for why I started my company, right? It's just people who have ideas, people who have knowledge and access to models and algorithms and all the open source software that's out there, but might not necessarily have access to the data that they need to do data science and machine learning applications, right? So it's a wonder if we can do this. But data is a weird asset, and for a couple of reasons. One, data can be replicated, right? You can copy and paste it. The other is it's almost impossible to determine a priori what the value of data is. What that really means is pricing data is hard. So we're talking about like a data marketplace. If I say I have this CSV, how do I know how much to charge you? How do you know how much you're willing to pay? It's just a really weird thing. And I think that's the thing that's sort of been missing with old attempts to kind of try to produce data marketplaces and what we can do now with blockchain technology and tokenization technology. Yeah, so right on cue. Tokenization to the rescue. One, for the first piece, users really own data access control via blockchains, right? That's, you've probably heard, if you've kind of read about blockchains at all, that's kind of been the most touted virtue of blockchains. It's just user control, anti-censorship, decentralized control over these assets and all that. And you can apply that to any sort of transaction, really, right? Whether that's a financial transaction through the Bitcoin ledger or authorization of access permissions is also a transaction you can mediate through a blockchain-style implementation. And then the other piece I think is a little bit less understood, so this is where I'll focus most of this talk kind of on this bucket here, is that tokens are freely tradable. And that has a lot of important implications. One, it helps as code starts, which I'll explain in a second. Two, it now solves that problem I told you about that I mentioned of it being very hard to price data before you know what it actually does, before you achieve any value out of it, right? So dynamic market-based pricing. And three, it now gives data asset value. So let's kind of walk through an example. So let's say you have data to upload, and I think it's data that's valuable to this data market that I'm creating that I can resell. Well, I don't resell, the smart contract resells. Problem is, I don't know how much data your data is worth, right? So here are some tokens. And I think the instinctive reaction to this is, what? Like, what does that do for me, right? But here's the thing. This is what tokens allows you to do. Tokens are hard-coded in software that can't be changed, right? So these immutable smart contracts. And what that means is, what you can say here is you can say that if your data does end up being valuable and people pay money towards it to get access to it later on, you're contractually or smart contractually guaranteed that money, or at least a portion of that money, and it's not something that anybody can do. Like you're guaranteed those rights in software, right? Delivered by a consensus network, right? So from that perspective, it changes a little bit. Sure, it's something that we don't know what this token is worth now, but it has value, and maybe it's worth nothing, but in that case, it symbolizes the fact that the data we contributed doesn't have value, or it could be worth a crap ton of money. And that symbolizes the fact that this ends up being valuable data that lots of people want to query and use for their future applications, right? And I think for me, that's fair, more than fair. The other thing that I mentioned was dynamic and market-based pricing. So here's just kind of a simple example. Imagine you had a crowdsourced data market where you had just 3 people who contributed data to it, and they contribute different amounts of data. So that's what these little different size files kind of corresponds to. One thing you can do is you can say, okay, proportional to your data contributions, here are tokens that reflect your ownership, right? As well as influence and other kind of rights. It's not just money. There are other rights that come with governing these blockchain networks that come with that. You can make that directly proportional to data. But something else you can do is you can say, okay, well, I'm also going to give you rewards proportional not just to how many tokens you own, representing how much of this data market you own, but also proportional to how often your data gets used, right? So let's say, even though Alice has a smaller data set that she contributed originally, the market proves out that data, that subset of data, is more valuable purely through the use of queries, right? The number of times people have paid to get access to that, and you're able to attribute that cash flow to the right person. And this is crucial now, right? Because again, we're going from that place of, I don't know how much money to give you, you don't know how much money to get. Well, proof is in the pudding 2 weeks later when it's dictated to you by the market how much value your data deserves, right, through usage. So rewards based on usage, not just volume of data. And giving data asset value, so to me, this is just completely new primitive, right? So you've probably heard of, maybe, I don't know, like who's heard of like CryptoKitties? Yeah, okay, so it's kind of a funny example, but to me, it's actually a very insightful example because basically with blockchains, you have a way through, again, these contractually agreed upon consensus-driven rights to digital properties, right? The ability to start putting asset value in things that previously would not have asset value. So even though CryptoKitties is a weird, fun example, you can still take that same sort of idea analogy and apply it to something like a trading data set, right? And what does that actually mean? That means that let's say this data set was tokenized. And what that means is, again, the contracts guarantee that by owning this token, I get paid money or Bitcoin or ETH, whatever medium you prefer, every time this subset of data is used. Well, what does that do? That puts value in that token. In fact, I would say, let's say, I'll use an example right now on a fly. Let's say this data gets queried so that it makes about $100 a day. Okay? Now, I'll just throw it out there. Would any of you be willing to buy it off of me if you made a guaranteed $100 per day from that? Any takers? Yeah? Yeah. I see some heads nodding. Now, like, how much would it be worth to you? I'm not going to pretend to know that, but that's the other beautiful thing about tokens. I mean, we call it freely tradable, which means that you have a natural supply, demand, and market bid for how much someone is willing to pay to get that cash flow. And that's all this really is. That's all data tokenization means. But what's new here is, when you think about data APIs and things like that, it means now you have the opportunity to monetize not just the transactions for access to data, but also the ownership rights of that data itself and create a secondary market around trading those rights, right? And I think that's going to be an incredibly powerful thing. And the reason why is because asset value can have multiples, many multiples worth more in value than pure transactions. And that's important to me because I think having that level of financial motive is going to be crucial to get people to solve that cold start problem of wanting to contribute and share data, not just because it's altruistic, but because there's actually financial profit and motive there, right? So we did all that. I want to actually dig into a little bit of a code here, if only to continue my trajectory of just trying to demystify what all this means with tokenization. And I'll just do this with a very naive example, an imperfect example with Ethereum smart contracts, right? Let's say we created a data market smart contract. And in it, I defined a struct called genome. And all that is it's a way to capture a bunch of data that represents different traits about a person, right? Name, maybe you don't want your name actually to be in there, but name, DNA, gender, date, age, other sort of phenotypic data as well too. And then what you can do is you can basically create an array of these structs. And then what do you have? You essentially have a decentralized database, a blockchain-based database, right? Cool. Not really. I actually think, in my view, I don't think you should think of blockchains as databases at all. I think they're terrible databases. And one of the reasons why is because it's crazy expensive to store that much data within these chains, right? These blocks on a blockchain. And also, blockchains are fully transparent and public for the most part. Most chains are. And there's sensitive data that you have in there that you don't quite want to expose to the world. Really, what you want to do here, the less naive example, is that you take the same contract that I just pointed out, but instead of putting the raw data in there, maybe you put pointers to data that's stored off-chain and that has additional permissioning access requirements needed to get to that raw data. And so what we've said now is we've said that using the smart contracts, that permissioning, right, that data access control permissions, the transactions for that happen in a blockchain layer. But all the sensitive stuff around how you deal with data, how you store it, how you secure it, how it's private, that can be all done in a very traditional way. You could, let's say, store it off-chain into AWS, or when the time comes and these decentralized storage networks are online and have performance that are tolerable, right, with respect to kind of applications that people want, you could do that too. These are pretty modular things. And in my view, I think in a few years, we're going to be talking about this stuff the same way we think about just modular engineering design with a bunch of different kind of components of a tech stack, right? And what it really means then, though, is that smart contract literally becomes the interface for anybody to pay for access to data. So literally, this smart contract allows you to create this public marketplace for people to be able to make data. So on the supply side, having a way to make a ton of money, and then on the demand side, having a way to get access to this open data set that's out there, right? So a few comments on what that decentralized data network stack looks like. That little base layer data asset tokenization is really for a couple of purposes. One is, like for Ethereum, for example, there are these things called ERC20 tokens is just the standard for you to think about how to tokenize any good, right? And it could be data, it could be real estate, it could be other digital things, right? Non-fungibles, collectibles, all sorts of things, but there's a standard for that. And then the other reason is for consensus, right? Because if you have unbreakable consensus, that's how like these things become money. When you can fully trust that no one can cook the books, that's when it becomes money. So we need that, right? That's definitely one crucial layer to stack. But then there are a few other things. One is you need exchange. What I mean by that is if these blockchain networks are essentially accessible through you paying tokens to get access to them, well then there has to be a way for you to easily acquire these tokens in order to operate it. Otherwise, the utility is going to be down, right? So exchanges are a big area of development right now in this blockchain universe. The other storage, here's where like I might be a little bit blasphemous to my crypto brethren here, but there's Filecoin, the decentralized network, but in my view, again, you can completely capture the permissionless nature of the money layer transactions and still marry that with things that we're just used to at production scale, right? With production integrity, right? AWS or GCP, and that's perfectly fine in my view. In fact, I'm gonna double down on this because I actually, for our company, not to talk too much about us, but we're gonna go that route to start because it turns out that as of right now, as much as we care about decentralization, AWS and GCP will give you the best security and privacy guarantees just because they've been battle tested. And I've talked to tons of customers, and they don't care, right? So it's things like that I think validate that you can really create these hybrid systems. Compute, same thing. You could, I guess, drag those AWS GCP icons over to the compute layer. But I think one thing I wanted to call for that is there is some question in this community around how much computation happens on-chain, right, through this distributed virtual machine, or how much of it happens off-chain. And there are pros and cons and trade-offs for each. And I'm happy to get into that's the whole nother topic, so I'm happy to get into that later, offline if you like. And then the last component that's crucial, at least for data networks, is the notion of privacy and a bunch of projects that are spinning up around that. So again, one way to achieve privacy is you have to trust, let's say, us or another company that runs the AWS cluster or nodes, right? And by the way, we do this already today, which is why I think that's not like necessarily deal breaking, right, for a lot of people. But in the future, longer run, if you had the ability to say, get your data served, right, or have computation served without even having to trust a single person, because the person or the compute node executing certain operations don't even know what they're doing, but they're creating the right result. That's going to be a wonderful and powerful thing. I think it's a little bit further away, but there are a lot of projects that are doing some really great things towards that. And in fact, Oasis Labs, Don Song, that's one of Don Song's startup, which is one of our keynote speakers for this conference. So let's say we're not there yet. We don't have privacy. There are actually things that you can do right now, right? So one thing you can do is just do everything end to end, and compute locally with your raw data. Maybe you just run your own local client for computations, right? I think there's some performance issues, but you do gain some security and privacy things. And I think other things you can do is you can defeat data replication through a couple things. One, what kind of data do you actually create a data market around? For example, if you create a data market around time series data, where the value of that data is actually not the batch data, but the continual data that you get over time, right? Whether it's like for financial trading, for example, or for purchase history, anything that's time-based, I actually think the leakage of value gets minimized pretty greatly. So that's one way to do it. Create a data market around any sort of data asset where that data asset refreshes, essentially. And the other is there are different ways for you to include fingerprinting and more traditional kind of digital protection mechanics, plus just legal agreements, right, that end up being a pretty big deterrent for most of these. And it won't be a catch-all. You're always going to have a little bit of fraud, but that's just exactly the case that we have now, even today, with our existing centralized payment services and other software products as well, too, right? So I think it's more about minimizing that to a certain degree as opposed to making it black and white sort of thing. That being said, I think what's been happening, I think we're in the middle of a macro trend right now. right? So there's the blockchain stuff, but in general, awareness about data privacy, understanding by enterprises how crucial and valuable it is to have data, and also now like the enterprise value of protecting the privacy of their customers' data, right? Like you see these market caps go up and down, or not really up, just down, right? Every time there's any sort of reported attack, right? Like this is becoming a core business issue. And as a result, I think we're seeing a big macro trend right now with an investment in new privacy technologies. And I've done a lot of review of this stuff. It's hard, but the good thing is a lot of it is it's not new science, right? Actually, a lot of the mathematical primitives behind this stuff is actually there. How do you scale it to a point where it's engineerable? That's a big challenge, but I feel like that's something that we've always been really good at as just humanity, right? So I'm very encouraged by that. The specific techniques that I think are around the corner are these, right? Secure multi-party computing. Differential privacy is pretty much already here. I think there are large companies already working on these sorts of systems. Although it doesn't offer you as great of privacy guarantees, but it's quite effective and powerful for a lot of applications. And then the last bit, which is the holy grail of sorts when it comes to privacy preserving computation, homomorphic encryption I think is the furthest off, but there have been exciting R&D results in recent years. And the idea behind this is that you can execute an encrypted query on encrypted data. So again, both sides get what they want. You get the result, and it's accurate. You never see the raw data, and your raw model or your raw query is never exposed, right? So cool literature happening and right around the corner. So what's next? A few things. One is I talked about data for now. Well, at Computable, we think of models as data sets too, right? They're basically a bunch of model weights and parameters and other sorts of metadata. If we can successfully deploy these data markets and help people deploy data markets for their applications, crowdsource data, why can't we also do that for AI models, right? Imagine having like inference engines that anyone can access almost as if it was like a public utility on a web, right? I think that's something that's very interesting. But we'll get to after we figure out we can do this, if we can do this or not, just with training data first. The other thing that we got to figure out is, what computations exactly will happen on chain, off chain, or even across chains, right? That's a big question facing this community. And then the last kind of general thing I touched on in the last few slides is just general scalability, security, and privacy of this decentralized web stack that I've kind of talked to you about in the second half of this preso. But yeah, happy to talk about that. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I don't tweet a lot, but if you want to tweet me, you can do that too. Or just ask me any questions after this. Also, if you do want to mess around with some stuff, it's early, our code base is early, and we're going to have more documentation up there soon. But if you want, we do have live code that you can play with right now, and we have been prototyping some of these data markets for various applications. So feel free to check out our GitHub repo as well too. Thanks, guys. Yeah.
So great idea. Just from implementation perspective, I'm pretty skeptical. And on those lines, I have two big questions.
Yeah.
One is the concept of pay per use. Right now, the algorithms and the computation of ML and AI is primarily based on either making it efficient for compute or storage or other things, but not about data use because typically companies own the data and they're running on. So as you shift to such a concept where you have to pay per use, it will become one of the factors to be optimized on, which I don't believe that the current open source library is optimized on, per usage of data or something. So that I see as a gap between the open source code as of now to go on to such a project. How do you plan to address that?
You mean like, so like for example, right now you might price access per like a cost structure that you have for how you do like execution or serving of data or some service, as opposed to, yeah. So short answer is we haven't figured that out yet. So pricing models are something that we're still working on. I think you can actually still borrow a lot of same concepts from how, let's say, like AWS or GCP prices their services right now, even like cost-based pricing, and just think about like, okay, here are the ways that we can set it up. I think what I mean by pay per use is what I mean is you can set like price thresholds for certain kinds of queries to certain kinds of data, and just literally do on an accounting basis, do distribution of that revenue to the right people. So it's not so much like reinventing how you price. It's reinventing how you distribute the profits to the appropriate people that create a value. If that makes sense.
Along the same lines, a quick follow-up. How would you differentiate between use and abuse? When you allow someone to use it after paying the right price, how do you abstain them from copying it and using it later or using it beyond the?
Yeah, so there are two ways to do that. The exotic ways, these privacy technologies kind of come online, and then you can just like encrypt everything and it works. Realistically, for now, I think what it means is that you have to ship queries or ship requests for computations to where the data is. And if you can do that, then you can control it. Now, of course, like if you do enough queries on anything, you can extract out data. But I think that's where if you set the right pricing levels, essentially, it kind of works itself out, just like existing systems do now that are based on pricing data. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
What is the cost involved in setting up a data marketplace? Like if I want to, as an individual, launch a data marketplace, how much would it cost?
Well, it costs you nothing to set it up, but it might cost you stuff to run it for sure. Like, and then how like what it costs to run you kind of breaks down to a few things. One is who's doing like the serving, right? So are you going to run your own client software that's like doing all the storage and compute of the data, right? That's one. So that would then feed into just your cloud infrastructure costs the same way that any other kind of application might have. But the additional set of costs that you have to consider would be transaction costs via the blockchain, right? So that's another, I didn't talk about that, but that's another new primitive that's a design challenge for engineers, right? Like every transaction that you run has to be picked up by Ethereum miners, which means that, and they have to get paid, which means that they take a slice of gas costs, right, for every transaction. And that's something that's going to be important too. But I think how much it will cost you will depend greatly on the application you want, how many transactions you do. And also, like right now, what we're doing with our contracts, right, like how efficient are we making our contracts and atomize them into building blocks to minimize the number of transactions per like actual act that you want from them. So it doesn't answer your question in terms of the quantitative number, but that's like the cost structure of what that would look like. But from perspective of getting one started, I think that's our hope. Maybe I didn't emphasize this enough, but everything we're doing is open source. So the idea here is you can go to a repo, and you should eventually be able to just take our contracts and spin up a data market on our network pretty instantly, right? Pretty quickly. If you know how you want to set some of these parameters like pricing, validating data, things like that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
your company does that. If I want to set up a data marketplace, your company can help.
Yeah, exactly. And right now, even we're talking to a few folks, I call them like early pilot partners in the sense that they have interest, but they don't have the blockchain expertise. But they have the domain expertise that we don't have for certain data markets. And we're doing some early data market experiments with them right now too. Yeah, so if you want to talk more, happy to talk. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So if you look at some of the, in the last 20, 30 or longer, as you said, people who have data plans and sell the data, for example, in the financial industry, householding data, name, address, post office, etc. So what's the differentiator between what you're trying to do? Because they know very well how to get this data, cleanse it, etc., and sell it. They don't have the bidding model, they don't have the pricing, maybe they don't have the, but the question is if they do that sort of stuff, are you going to be competing with them, and if they get more into, all kinds of data, which is, for example, used for all kinds of, not unstructured data for different kinds of machine learning,
Yeah.
etc.
So my suspicion is I don't think we're going to be really competitive because I think our hope here is like to take data that doesn't get traded enough, right, and bust them out of the silos because people decide. Because a lot of times data silos don't come just from like the fact that they want to hoard, but it just comes from the fact that it's not worth it enough for them to put in the work to do it. But if you can make it profitable, maybe you can break them out of silos, and some of those silos are silos precisely because there are no black market like data broker traders for that kind of data. So I think this is actually in many ways creating a new market, right, or adding on to a market. And then if you compare it vis-a-vis to existing kind of data markets like the just offline data markets, I think the way it's different is just kind of, it's the classic kind of network elasticity, price elasticity based on networks kind of thing, right? So right now, well, for one, I think it's validation that people trade customer data and finance data all the time already, that selling data is a thing. These are all just kind of very opaque deal-based transactions. And I think what I'm saying is like, if you had a way to make it like fairly free market-based through a smart contract, right? Then I think, of course, like the price curve would probably drop for some of these assets, but the volume of people who would be acquiring them would probably scale up quite a bit as well too. And yeah, so that's how I think they're different. Yeah.
I'm sorry, and maybe you're also democratizing this marketplace in a sense. Rather than trusting, because those guys get your data, they have it, you don't know, that's a different.
Yeah. So I mean, like, think of this as like the free market, like the I don't know, maybe this isn't the right term for it, but like the white market version of the black market for data, right? But that being said, I'm not like, I think there are different types of data markets, right? I think you could create one where I'll tell you one I think is interesting. I think if everybody like took their camera feeds and just siphoned that off into like a data market for everyone to train off of, and it's just a public data market, and they all make money from the process. And I think that creates incredible value, right, in terms of training data and relevance for like even autonomous vehicle training, right? Because you can, have street cameras and stuff too. Like that should be a public utility, public market, fully public market kind of thing, and great value. Or it could be like a healthcare organization who has like a hybrid where it's like we make it a free market, but within our kind of ecosystem, because we also want to make sure that people who are in this market are trusted people that we have like done identity KYC services on that should have access to this kind of sensitive data. And our goal is actually not to dictate how you do that. Our goal is to make it very, very like stupid simple for you to do either or, essentially. Yeah.
So you mentioned about that the privacy part is still kind of with moving parts, that's what I understand.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts about in the world of GDPR?
Yeah.
How do you manage consent for your personal data and trading that consent? Also, I heard about a really interesting concept of human data licensing models.
Yeah.
So if you have any comment about that.
Yeah, I mean, in a weird way, the example I gave was kind of like a human data licensing model, right? So I think it can be a thing, right? I think it's a weird frame, right, to people to kind of say human data licensing, but I think the reality is, what do you do? What happens right now when Facebook like leverages different data for advertising products or this or that? That's human data, right? Except that the person from whom the data came from has like almost zero control or rights over that data and how it's monetized, and zero cut of that as well too. But I certainly think that can be part of it. And then in terms of GDPR, I think in my view, like for example, for us, for some of our applications that we're exploring, we're going to have to think a lot about compliance, GDPR, HIPAA, and things like that. It's a pain in the ass, but you should do it, and I think it's fine. And then I think you fast forward a couple years, I think these sorts of networks are almost the only way you can actually enforce that. And the reason why is because in these networks, you can actually start registering what data came from who and have provenance over that. And then therefore, you can actually give a push button to like an end user, for example, to say yes or no, opt in or opt out. Whereas I think if you don't have like that provenance or control that you can federate out to a user, which you just don't like right now, like for example, the markets we talked about earlier, that data, a lot of people from whom that data came from, they don't even know that their data is being traded left and right. You can have GDPR and it's not even enforceable, right? So long term, I think this kind of stuff actually helps GDPR. Yeah. Yep.
So this is sort of an ecosystem question, how you kind of fit into the world you see coming.
Yeah.
So if you take Singularity.net and Ocean Protocol and Fetch.ai, do you think this, and I can't even believe we're talking about blockchain and AI together in the same sentence, but do you think this token economy will come where you pay for AI or ML type agents to perform services for you? Do you really think that people will pay for that? I mean, you're talking about data.
Yeah.
Do you think, these AI agents that could be decentralized?
Oh, like if there were someone creating autonomous agents?
Agents
Oh.
that should be paid for? Instead of data, you pay agents instead. Do you think we'll actually ever pay for AI agents to perform
I think it totally depends on what you mean by AI agent, and I think I think right now we in many ways pay, like if you use I don't know, like some product with image recognition or text recognition, right? And maybe you don't pay, maybe it's a free consumer product, but you're engaging with like an AI agent that you're paying either in attention or paying in like a subscription fee every month. So I think yes, but I think like you have to take that from like esoteric vision to product, and it just depends on what's the product service that the AI agent provides. But yeah, I think so.
The Ocean protocol, like, talk about that, it's out there for data transport.
Yes, I think Ocean is doing. I don't know too much about what they're doing, but I know that it's very similar to us in the sense that they want to create these data markets. But I think they seem to have more of a focus on creating like the compute and serving network for that data. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, sorry, Ree. Yeah. So I don't know. I think I guess what's your question? Is it like
I guess, it's a future world, going from the crypto economy to a token-based economy, and you're paying for data, but then things consume that data, or maybe I buy AI agents, and maybe these agents do something, and I want to pay an agent with a token.
So I'll put it this way. I think the answer is yes, but I don't think it has anything to do with the rationale. Doesn't have anything to do with necessarily the implementation, like tokens or not. I think it's just if there's like a training data set out there, and it's like the most valuable training data set for me, and I have this like software that I wrote that's an AI agent, and I have programmatic access to both, which means I can like hook them up, and then there's like fees transactions that happen. Because that's the best training set for this RL agent to continue to improve itself. Yeah, why not? Because from a pure like application perspective, that's going to improve my agent, right? So I think so, but I think I wouldn't say like you can take away blockchain and token terminology completely away from that conversation, and then that still happens, right? But that's based more on the value you create. Yeah, so I think so, but we'll see. What are the killer apps? I think is going to be the big question. Yeah.
Have you thought about what you would do to handle people just generating fake data sets, for example, like I could have a look at samples of records and then
Yeah.
simulate that and like generate 1 million tokens, sell that, then sell the token afterwards?
Yeah, that's a great question. So validation is like crucial for these things. There are a few things you can do. One is you can, so for example, if it's like a health data set and it's coming from like an institution, is there a way for you to do verification just to prove that it came from that institution? Maybe that's enough of validation. But if you can't do that, the second thing you can do is just rely on experts to like filter it or rely on software to filter it. But honestly, I think that's challenging. And I think there will be a lot of data markets where they flood with crap. But I think the reason why we designed our protocol, for example, to be for valued creation distribution like real money, to be based on usage, is actually because if like garbage in, garbage out, you can create a data market and flood it with nonsense data. But if people realize that and don't want to use it because it's nonsense data, it's not helpful, they don't make money anyways, right? But actually has on an interesting point, which is we've had dialogue internally around how synthetic training data is a real thing, right? It could be fake data, but actually useful data. Yeah. So if you had a way to crowdsource that or efforts around that, it could actually be a positive thing. Yeah. Cool. Any questions? How are we doing on time? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Maybe along the lines on the synthetic data front, is that a competitor or market trend that works against you guys going forward, or is it just another data set that can be sold? And then in terms of like unsupervised learning that requires less and less data,
Yeah.
how does that impact maybe your TAM in the future?
I don't think it's. I guess you can argue it's competitive in the sense that you can create training data synthetically, but I think one, it's really hard, and I think that's going to happen on like what kind of training data, for example, and it's going to be like point case by point case that you can create that, and so I think the pie is plenty big enough for just creating value here, where you can have valuable businesses built around just simulation and synthetic data, as well as crowdsourced real data. Yeah.
On the unsupervised learning, as the need for data sort of decreases in
Oh yeah.
that impact
Yeah, I'm sure it does, right? But I think data is one of those things where it's like for every like end in sight you see for an application, there's like a gazillion other cases where data is the problem, right? So so long term, it's hard for me to like prognosticate like where you run out of TAM for this kind of thing. Yeah. In fact, when it comes to just like competition, like I'm more worried about customers than competition right now. So yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I'll be around, so feel free to ask me any questions. Use our software.